So I went down to the garden this morning to grab some bell peppers because I've been freezing some stuffed bell peppers. When I was down there, there were a ton of hot cayenne peppers, and all I've done this year with these guys is just dry them in the dehydrator just to crush up for red pepper flakes and things. But I wanted to try some hot sauce, and I've been meaning to do it all year, but I've been so busy that I just haven't. So I'm gonna try to do that right now. And so these are cayenne peppers. It's funny, some of my plants had really big ones and then some plants had really tiny ones. So I do know that these are super hot peppers. So what I'm gonna try to do so that the hot sauce isn't completely unbearable is to try to cut it with some sweeter peppers. So I think this is a bell pepper, this is a Marconi, I've got some poblano in here. And so yeah, we're just gonna kind of see how it all goes. So I've gone ahead and washed my peppers, and I'm just drying them off. I wash them in city water, which has chlorine, and when you're fermenting, you really don't want to deal with the chlorine in that because it will inhibit the fermentation process, because you're just trying to get an environment for good bacteria to grow, and chlorine will kill that. So I'm going to need about 1.25 pounds of peppers, and so I've got my little scale there zeroed out with my bowl on it so that I know that I have enough. And then I've got my gloves on because, man, nobody wants to get this stuff in their eyeballs. There are so many things that I've meant to do this year with the food coming in from the garden, but sometimes when you have so much stuff coming in, you kind of get paralyzed and you just kind of stick with what you've been doing. So for a lot of my peppers this year, I've been cutting them and freezing them so that we can just, you know, use them when we need them in chilies or, you know, in the morning fried up with some eggs or something like that. But I did try that stuffed bell pepper recipe last night, and those were absolutely amazing. I can't believe it. They just seem like such a really plain, I don't know, the ingredients aren't even really appealing to me, but it was so good. So I was excited to find that recipe. And, you know, I also made some hot pepper jelly this year, which I've not made in a few years. So the recipe that I used for that was also really delicious. And so I have been learning a lot for sure on how to preserve things. And so for the next garden season, I'll have a bigger resource to know what to do with the things coming in. Because I know it's just, you know, you bring it in from the garden and you're overwhelmed, but if you know what you're doing you bring it in and you're kind of excited, like, oh man, look at all the bell peppers I have, you know, I'll be able to have stuffed peppers all year long. So it's been a good year in preserving, but it's also been a really good year in learning how to do new things. If you saw one of my other videos, we had to dry can a lot of our potatoes, because those were starting to go soft. Typically, I would just keep those in storage, you know, as a root crop. They store really well, but my storage conditions are not ideal for them. So they started to go soft, and I thought, well, you know, everybody raves about dry canning potatoes. And so I went ahead and did it, and they are delicious. And you can fry those things up just like you would fry up a regular, you know, fresh potato. And so yeah, so that's gonna be one of the ways that I do that in the future. I also did make some hash browns that I froze, you know, for the kids to just sort of throw in a pan in the morning. And that's very labor intensive, and although those were delicious, I just haven't had the time to do more of those, unfortunately. But that's also another option for potatoes. And then you could just blanch them and freeze them as well. Although I don't think that those fry up as well as the ones that I did dry canned in my mason jars. We are moving towards winter, and we are definitely in fall now. There's just not gonna be a lot to do in the garden. You know, the cabbage will kind of just hang out in there till I'm ready. The broccoli will hang out in there. We have pretty mild winters. So last year we actually got down to like 8 degrees, and that was very untypical for us. We don't typically get down that cold. So that did pretty much take out everything in the garden, except for the garlic and the onions. Those did just fine. But as far as anything from fall that I had in there, most of it had already been harvested and used. But I'm hoping this year we can get a little bit more out of the garden a little bit further in. So, and my goal is to continue to start a lot of lettuces and greens in here and then put them out in the green stalks on the driveway to keep a constant supply of those greens and lettuces so we don't have to buy those items. Of course, we won't have any cucumbers or tomatoes coming in. The peppers, they freeze up really nicely. I also have some pickled peppers that I did, you know, so we could throw those on a salad. Hopefully we won't have to buy any peppers this year. But I think cucumbers, tomatoes, and then fruits, you know, like bananas or apples or things like that. I'm hoping to stock up on a lot of apples since those are in season right now. I do want to make some applesauce. I have plenty of apple pie filling that's already been taken care of for the year, but I would really like to get some applesauce. My kids don't eat a ton of applesauce, but when they discovered my applesauce instead of the store-bought one, I think they were cracking open a jar a day, and so it went really fast. So I'm gonna try to get some of that done, and then maybe just put some apples in the fridge if I have fridge space, because they'll just store longer in there. And so yeah, we'll just kind of see. My goal is not to buy too much from the store. We've basically been living off pork and venison over the past 9 months. I have not bought chicken from the store. We do have our own meat birds here that are Delaware chickens. They're a dual purpose breed. And so I can harvest those at any time. But that is the problem, is that there is no time. So maybe over the winter, if we want some chicken, we will go ahead and, you know, hatch some of those guys out and, you know, raise them up and process them. We are running low on venison, but hunting season is about to start up in the next, in the next week or so. Bow hunting's been going on for a while now, but as far as, you know, rifle and gun hunting, that will be starting up. And so we will be hopefully replenishing that. That's basically our red meat in this house. I don't buy ground beef anymore. We never really bought steaks because I'm so cheap that steaks were just always so expensive. I know that when we have family come visit, you know, and they'll go out and go to Costco and say, hey, let's get some steaks, you know, it's like $120 for a pack of steaks. So that is just too rich for my blood. So yes, venison is the red meat of choice, and I found some really great ways to prepare that. Down here in the South, the venison that we get is so young and so small that it doesn't get that real gamey flavor. In fact, it doesn't have any gamey flavor at all. My dad used to hunt up in Maine, almost in Canada, when I was a kid, and when he came home, if he had a buck, which was rare, I think the guys just went up there for vacation every year, but if he did come home with a buck, it always had that traditional venison gamey flavor. But down here, I mean, you know, I can make meatballs, throw it in my marinara sauce, and, you know, not worry about altering the flavor at all of that dish. So that's been great. And then, although we do have a ton of pork, we will most likely get some pigs sooner than later so that we're processing them in the winter. Or actually, now that I say that, I actually don't know when we'll get them because I do have so much, but we want to start having them ready to be processed in the winter as opposed to early spring, because this year we ran into the problem of running out of time. Nate was putting in the irrigation in the garden for me, and that was top priority. So we were not going to take the time to process the pigs right away. We were just going to kind of wait to process them until we were ready after the irrigation was in. And by the time that was done, it was so warm and there were so many flies that we just ended up taking them to a processor and getting that done. And although it was very pricey, because they scald the meat, Nate and we don't have the equipment to do that, so we skin them. We end up losing a lot of the fat that way, but because they scald them, they maintain a lot of that fat. So the ground pork that they gave us is so delicious. My ground pork was very, very lean when we did it. So that the ground pork is amazing from the processor, as well as they were able to give me the leaf lard, which is the lard above the kidneys. That's great for pastries and pie crusts. And then I got the rest of the lard from the pig that I can render down and store. So that's something that we weren't able to get when we processed it ourselves. We got a little bit of the leaf lard, but not as much as this processor gave us. Okay, so to make the brine, like I said, you need to use distilled water or well water. You don't want to use city water because of the chlorine. It will just kill the bacteria that you're trying to grow. 1 1/4 quarts will just be 5 cups of water. And then we're gonna use 3 1/2 tablespoons of sea salt. So I used to always use Himalayan sea salt for my ferments, but the problem with Himalayan sea salt, it works perfectly fine, but it's pink. And if you've ever had a ferment go bad, sometimes you'll get a pink yeast. And so I always, I don't know, just the color of the brine that the Himalayan salt makes kind of threw me off for a little while, because I did have 1 or 2 that went bad, and then I was nervous. So I started just using plain sea salt, but you can use really any kind of salt as long as it's not iodized salt. And you also don't want any like anti-caking things in it. So like the ingredients on this just say sea salt. So as long as there's just salt, you are good. So I'm gonna mix that up. Oh, and I almost forgot too, I need garlic. All right, and that is it, guys. All right, so we've got to get to homeschooling. I got to clean this kitchen up without burning myself with all these hot peppers. And I might bring you back a little bit later today if I do get some time to make another cup of hot sauce. So thanks, guys, so much for hanging out with me today, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.